So the story is this, that the world's largest rice exporter, India, has banned exports of non-basmati white rice to rein in domestic prices and ensure the adequate availability of non-basmati white rice almost a week ago. So this type of rice, it constitutes about 25% of total rice that is exported from the country. The grain that we're talking about is a staple. It's a staple for almost half of the world's population. Asia, using roughly 90% of the worldwide supply, with India supplying rice to more than 100 countries. So the effects can be palpable. The news of panic buying coming in from several cities in the US and Canada, they've been something that we've been looking at. Even the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has said that it would encourage India to remove the restrictions on the export of a certain category of rice, which it said would have an impact on global inflation. At home, this move is also affecting several distilleries. And we've learned from sources that soon a group of secretaries are going to meet. They're going to decide on alternatives for the supply of food grains to distilleries. Because for the time being, it's not going to be rice. On this subject, we have a small report and then we'll debate this. But here's the report first.
Sources are informing that halt in rice supply to the ethanol production companies is a temporary measure, and government will soon invite ethanol production companies to find a solution. We are given to understand that a group of secretaries will meet to check out a plan to find an alternative solution to supply sufficient amount of food grain to the companies. As you are aware that FCI has not supplied rice to the distilleries for more than 10 days, and that had forced them to cut down ethanol production. Therefore, ethanol production companies have approached Department of Food and Public Distribution for its immediate intervention. We are also learning from our sources that distilleries have also asked for relief in a current penalty mechanism in a case of missing ethanol production target. It is also important to note that FCI has to supply 34 lakh ton of rice during current ethanol supply year, but it has only supplied 40 lakh ton of rice so far. So taking all into consideration, the government is planned to meet industry on this particular issue to find out an amicable solution. Also, more than 100 distilleries are there in the country that may be impacted due to this order, and it may also affect the government's overall target to achieve ethanol blending by 2025.
So this creates all kinds of problems when you restrict the supply of rice, because it's a staple, because it's required in certain targets when you talk about ethanol blending, like was pointed out in that report. So these various aspects around the banning of rice exports, let's discuss it with Siraj Hussain, former Secretary, Minister of Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. He's also the co-promoter of ARCUS Policy Research and the chairperson of Bharat Krishak Samaj. Ajay Vir Jakhar is also with us this evening. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Mr. Hussain, coming to you first, in your opinion, how important was it for the government right now to impose this ban on non-basmati white rice? The point in time is important. It's not like it hasn't happened in the past. I remember in 2007 also, this kind of ban was imposed, again for the same reasons, because of inflationary concerns, price rise, the concern. But tell us about why it has been so crucial for the government to impose the ban on export of rice this time.
We have to appreciate that the ban on export of white rice is coming due to the shortfall in the production of wheat last year and also the shortfall in the production of wheat this year. Even though the government estimates do not reflect any shortfall in production of wheat, the trade thinks that the production is lower by about 5 to 7 million tons as compared to the government estimates. So as a result of this, both wheat and rice have been experiencing double-digit inflation. Therefore, after taking into consideration the threat of El Nino and untimely rains in Punjab and Haryana, which have damaged the rice crop, which was already transplanted. I think the government had very little options, and therefore this ban has come.
Has this been a production issue? How do you see this production of wheat getting hit as well? Because like Mr. Siraj Hussain is pointing out, it's not just rice this time. We're looking at prices rising over the last couple of months when it comes to wheat too. So how much of a concern area is it with both these staples? Sir, this question was for you, Mr. Ajay Jakhar.
Okay, you didn't say that. Anyway, so Siraj Hussain Saab has written a very good article today on this very subject. It's very informative, where he talks exactly what he just said now. But what we also have to see is that this is the election year. And inflation is one of the things that was responsible for the fall of UPA 2. And in the election year, the government would not want to take a risk. And so this could also be one of the reasons that was worrying the government. Of course, El Nino is the year of the El Nino, and that means there's suppressed rainfall. I think so it will be another month before the government has more clarity on productivity estimates and on rice acreage in the country. And I'm sure the government will relook at this decision on ban of export of rice. But I want to take this opportunity to come to ethanol. I think the government should have banned use of grains and ethanol and then looked at banning export of rice. Now, the government has done it in the reverse order, which I think so is surprising, and it could have been better handled. So this is something that must be.
Why is that, Mr. Jakhar? Why is that more crucial to do it as far as distilleries are concerned to restrict the supply of the grains there?
See, distilleries are not a priority for this country. The priority for this country is hunger, it's malnutrition, it's about world hunger, it's about using grains as soft diplomacy in the world, as we did in the COVID years. The government did fantastic by exporting grains to those countries which were in desperate need of grains at that time. I think as a farmers organization in a country where rate of hunger is still very high, we are not in a position to use grains for biofuels. And I think this whole idea of biofuel mandates is wrong, not only in India, it is wrong worldwide.
Okay.
No, I've not finished. Let me talk on ethanol.
Sure.
Because this is what you are asking. In the US, in Europe, everyone's saying that Russia is wrong, that they've allowed the Black Sea grain deal to lapse. If they were so worried about hunger in Africa and in the developing world, they should have given a moratorium on ethanol biofuel mandates. But they've not done that. So I think what people are saying in the world and what they intend to do, they're completely different things. I think what the government could have done better with this ban on export of rice is that they could have put this information to the world in a better way rather than announce it as an arbitrary decision. They should have been given to the world like this is what we are anticipating. So this
let me take that across to Mr. Hussain. Do you think it's an arbitrary decision? Because here we are talking about fears of stoking inflation in countries that are so reliant on Indian rice that it creates food insecurity. We have a word coming in from the IMF as well. What do you make of it? Do you think this is a knee-jerk reaction? Sir, Mr. Siraj Hussain.
You see, those who follow the food policy of India knew that this kind of decision may well be anticipated. However, Mr. Jakhar is right. From time to time, senior spokespersons of the government have given an impression as if we are hugely surplus, and from time to time, it is said that we will beat last year's achievement of export of $50 billion of agricultural commodities. So in that sense, to many people, it would come as a surprise. Let me also add that even in a normal year, even if there was no El Nino and no impact of climate change, use of rice or wheat for manufacture of ethanol is a bad policy. I have written about it several times, and I would again like to repeat for your audience that if there is surplus production of rice, the government in any case should be taking steps to reduce the cultivation of rice in water stressed regions of India. And for that, policies in conjunction with the state governments need to be formulated.
Right. So, at this point in time, since both of you have brought in climate change, Mr. Jakhar, you want to add to that, because I'm looking at the impact, and perhaps at this point in time, we need to be better prepared because it's going to get worse going ahead, right? These erratic conditions that we have with our monsoons, that means as far as food security is concerned, that does come under a huge shadow of doubt. Are we getting more prepared, or are these policies going to hurt us more for the times to come?
See, prices rise not only because of impact of weather and climate change, they basically rise, I think, more because of government policy and speculation. And the world was not aware of this, that this export ban was going to happen on 13th of July. Being a part of the UN Global Crisis Response Group, the Food Network stream, which has been convened by the UN Secretary General, I had warned them that this was about to happen. On 18th of July, I put it out on social media, this ban is coming in and the prices are going to spike. Within 5 days of this decision coming in, the prices spiked. Corn prices went up by 11%, by 9%. Wheat prices went up by 11% worldwide. Now, that's a huge, huge thing. So when I said arbitrary decision, announcement, it's not making, maybe the government was thinking about it, but the announcement should have been done. People should have been warned this was coming. So the poorer nations do not suffer here. What I want to put on, because I don't know how much time there is on this show, but what I want to put on is, as a farmers organization, we are not against banning export of rice or agriculture commodities if there is a food security concern for India, which there is today, till we are not sure about the monsoons. But the question is, what do we do about it?
Correct.
So as a farmers organization, we've been telling the finance minister year after year that when you subdue farm gate prices because of government policy, as it happens with an export ban, because farmers will not get market prices, then you have to compensate farmers for that loss.
Right.
Because this loss that farmers are suffering, will suffer on farm gate prices, is going to be account on government policy. Now,
Sure.
that government policy is a necessity for this country, but farmers must be compensated for that. That's the important point I want to put across to all the viewers today.
Yes, that's a fair point. As far as policy goes, Mr. Hussain, if you can weigh in on this, because any kind of ban, when you're talking about exports, and we know about our current account deficit situation as well, we are talking about the impact on other countries, and that is fairly concerning as well. But when you talk about your own economy and you talk about export bans, how much does it really hurt?
It would definitely hurt the countries which are dependent on Indian rice. However, as I have written in my article today in the print, 5 million tons of basmati rice is likely to be exported anyway. Out of the non-basmati rice export of 17 million tons last year, about 8 million tons was the parboiled rice, and there is no ban on export of that. So that will also go, which means that about 13 million tons of rice is likely to be exported anyway. In addition to that, my own impression is that India will like to help its neighbors like Nepal and Bangladesh on strategic considerations, and India will relax the ban on export of even white non-basmati rice to these countries. So in all, I think our exports may still touch about 16 to 17 million tons.
So not too bad a situation when you're talking about the damage that this kind of ban would cause, and perhaps it is going to be restricted by way of the amount of time that we are going to have this kind of restriction on exports. But Mr. Jakhar, I understand that we've stored away 3 times more rice than what the buffer stock actually mandates. And I'm looking at some of that data put out by the Food Corporation of India, which shows that our rice buffers seem to have grown quite healthily. So where is the problem then? That's what I started out asking you, because this kind of situation, and we are having a discussion about inflation as well, where the issue of supply chains came up. Is there a problem that needs fixing that we aren't able to and we need to do it quickly?
Thank God for MSP procurement or procurement of grains at minimum support price that we have these buffers. These buffers saved us in the COVID years. This buffer will save us this year. So this is, I really appreciate that the government has created these buffers. They've increased these buffers over the last few years. It's a good step. But we do not know if the monsoon is going to be a normal monsoon. We are worried about that, especially in an election year. So I'm not saying the government has taken this decision because elections are around the corner, but that obviously weighs heavy on the government. So I think we will wait. If it was not an El Nino year, I don't think so the government would have done this export ban at this stage. They would have waited for some more time. But I also want to add that we may not. So what happens in a market is a ban where you disrupt 5% of the supplies, even if the supplies could be disrupted because of production shortfall, or supplies could be disrupted because of the Ukraine war, because of the Black Sea grain deals being is not being allowed to go through repeated, or Indian export bans. That's when speculators jump in and make a lot of money. And I think this should clearly be noted. So if this decision had been taken and world was prepared for this spike in prices would not have come that we have seen in the last 10 days, and India would not have been criticized on this decision. But those criticizing India, like the UN or World Health Organization, these all organizations are not talking about telling the world to consume less meat, which takes up most of the grain and farmland use in the world. They're not telling United States or Brazil and all these places to stop using grains for ethanol. They never did it in the worst of COVID years. So these people trying to preach to us and tell us what we should be doing, especially World Bank, I think so is ridiculous. They should look inwards and tell themselves what they're doing wrong while we look after ourselves.
Do you think that's the correct tactic that India is imposing right now, Mr. Siraj Hussain, by going after export bans? Is that the correct way to do it? As much as you've talked about how much grain should be given to the distilleries for ethanol production, tell us about the options that a government needs to play with before it imposes an export ban like the kind that we are seeing on rice at the moment.
You see, the government considers a whole lot of things before imposing a ban of this kind. They would have taken into account the likelihood of monsoon, the stocks available with Food Corporation of India, the inflation in other commodities, because sometimes there is high inflation in other commodity, and in sympathy of that, inflation takes place in case of the other commodity also. So all these factors would have been taken into consideration. You see, according to the roadmap prepared by the Niti Aayog for ethanol, 55% of ethanol was to come from sugarcane, which is on track, which is not a bad policy, which is a good policy. In fact, we have done a detailed paper on this. Sometimes maybe you should discuss that paper. 45% of ethanol was to come from grains. We do not think that India is in a position to supply grains for ethanol. And therefore, all these private sector distilleries which have been set up, in my view, have taken a risk, because they would have also known, they should have known that Indian surpluses of food are very small.
But going ahead from here, if this is the kind of state policy that we are going to impose in these generally inflationary times, do you think that can be sustained, Mr. Jakhar?
I think so. We need to keep these buffer norms. We need to, in fact, increase this, because as you wanted to discuss climate change, what climate change does is it does these extreme weather events which impact production. So we'll have to be more careful. We'll have to design bigger buffer norms and for more crops and across more regions. I think so. That's how things will have to go. There are lots of economists who've written about MSP about disbanding the MSP and having these and allowing market forces to work. I think those all arguments fall flat in front of climate change scenarios that we are seeing. So I think we need to expand on our buffer norms, expand on the diversity of crops on which we are creating these buffer norms is going to be difficult. But I think so that's what's required going ahead.
The kitchen staples are far too many, Mr. Siraj Hussain. Would you agree that this is what we need to do? Perhaps work on our buffer policy that much more and ensure that food security is never in question, and perhaps we can control our prices that much more in the future, considering the impact of climate change as well. Do you see that likely?
See, the buffer norms are supposed to be revised every 5 years. However, if I remember correctly, the last revision was in 2015. So the revision is due, and the decision of the government to ban the export of wheat and now rice shows that government itself does not consider the current buffer norms to be adequate for meeting the food security needs of India.
We'll have to keep watching this space to see exactly what emerges. Sir, you wanted to add, Mr. Jakhar? Go ahead,
Yes.
sir.
Before you end, I want to add, and Siraj Hussain Saab will validate what I'm saying because he was in the ministry when this happened. So if you look at the two things, I think so Indian policy, agricultural policy is suffering from. One is estimation, consumption estimates. The other is real-time production estimates. We really don't know how much is being produced, how much is being consumed. The data is very unreliable, and you cannot make good policy out of unreliable data. And that's exactly what seems to be happening. The government thought it had enough food supply. Suddenly inflation is going up. So that's one of the problems. The other problem is this arbitrary announcements. So every time a country like India, which has huge demand or huge supplies, which when it makes these announcements, it impacts international prices and people get to suffer because of it. And Siraj Hussain Saab will, like I said, validate it. Happened with the sugar trade.
Yes.
Government announced huge procurements in UPA 2 time, I don't know, UPA 1 in those years. And the sugar prices world over went up and people made billions of dollars in the international seas. So I think these two things is what country needs to work on. The people are suffering because of hunger, not only in India and the world, because of what happens on the policy table. You need to get stakeholders on the policy table to design policies. And this is about getting right estimates. This is about getting right consumption estimates. It's about not making arbitrary decisions. It's about having standard operating procedures, which are transparent, which have clarity, which everybody trusts in. And these are things that are required. And these don't require work on the farm or on the field to increase production. This requires for people to sit in Delhi, in the world capitals everywhere, and look at it. So it's a much wider issue, but these are issues I think that the government must be flagging so these things don't become regular features.
Is it a malaise? Let me ask Mr. Siraj Hussain before we wind up. Is that something that is emblematic as far as data is concerned? Mr. Jakhar is saying it is unreliable, and then you have knee-jerk policy decisions, something that we could do without. Tell us how it was while you were serving and how things are changing. Would you red flag these?
Actually, the agriculture data, as Mr. Jakhar has pointed out, needs to be much better, more frequent collection and updation of data, and a lot of cross-checking of government data with other data sources. So that is very much there. I have also written about it, a couple of articles on data of agriculture. So, for example, the consumption data, the rice and wheat and other food items consumed every year is not prepared by the government year after year. So we depend on the data which is issued by the US Department of Agriculture. In any case, Dr. Vivek Debroy has also been writing about the quality of data, and not only about agriculture data. He has been writing about employment, about GDP, about the contribution of unorganized sector and so on. So yes, we do need better data.
Hopefully, we will get both, and policies are going to be stronger that will see us through the impact of climate change as well. It remains a hope, it remains a prayer, it remains a demand as well, because we are seeing inflationary conditions hit all of us in big ways and small. And it isn't just our economy, we're talking about the global economy as well. So thank you very much, Mr. Jakhar, Mr. Siraj Hussain, for joining us with your deep perspective and insights. And we hope to connect with you in the future as well on India Development Debate. I'm Vikram Oza. Thanks indeed. Good evening.